Okay, this is Byrchall High School, Team Byrchall P Department, and this is a revision podcast for the Cambridge National in Sports Science. It is for Unit R041, which is reducing the risk of injuries, or reducing the risk of sports injuries. We're doing one for each learning objective. This is learning objective 2, so there's a series of them. So you obviously listen to the others all on Mr. Williams' YouTube channel. We're looking at learning objective 2 today. That is understanding how warm-up and cool-down routines help prevent injury. So obviously talking about what's involved in a warm-up and cool-down, why you do it, and all the reasons behind it. So myself, Mr. Williams on this one. I've also got Miss Radcliffe with me on this one.
Hello.
Hi, Miss, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the factors and some of the components as part of it. And again, what I will say on all of these things is this is just one way of revising. Another way of revising, you've also got notes, you've also got revision guides, there'll be online resources, etc. It's just another way of doing it. We won't say every single part of every part of the course that you've done on this podcast. It's an overview of learning objective 2, key factors in it or key points in it, and obviously you might have to expand on them further in an exam. So first of all, this one is all about warm-up and cool-down, as we've said. And first of all, what is a warm-up? Well, you'll all know that a warm-up is what you do or carry out before a game or a performance to get ready physically and psychologically. The first thing I'd say is everyone misses the psychological part of a warm-up. Everyone knows that you do a pulse raiser to get blood moving around the body, and you do stretching to avoid injury and pulling muscles, but not enough people talk about the psychological side of a warm-up to get yourself ready for competition, to get yourself in the right place. So make sure, if you ask what a warm-up is, you don't just mention the physical, you also say that it has psychological benefits to the performer. We're going to look at, first of all, what are the physical benefits of a warm-up. So what are the actual reasons I do a warm-up physically, and we'll talk about them as we go. So I'll do the first one, then Mitch will do the next one, etc. So the first one is warming up muscles. So obviously we want our muscles to be warm, temperature to be higher in them, so you are loose, and that your muscles are working fluidly, therefore you are preparing your body for physical activity. So first one is to physically get your muscles warm, and then therefore get your body loose and ready for physical activity. Miss?
The second one is to increase our body temperature so that our muscles are more flexible and you are less likely to get an injury. If your muscles are cold, they are more likely to snap or tear, and so you've got to get your body warm to make them more flexible. You'll
know that yourselves, won't you, from when you've played sport in the cold and you go out and initially you feel sort of stiff and cold and all the rest of it, so you need to make sure your body temperature raises, therefore your muscles raise. So those points are quite similar. Next one is to increase your heart rate, which in lessons in school we would call a pulse raiser. You need to get oxygen to your working muscles. You all know that you want oxygen. Oxygen is the fuel that makes your muscles work, so you want the oxygen to get to the working muscle before you start your game, so that you've got energy in the muscles. So increase the heart rate, which therefore delivers oxygen to the working muscles.
As well as your muscles, you've got tendons and ligaments, which connects the muscles together and the joints together. It's important that you warm up to increase the pliability of these, and again to reduce the chance of pulling a tendon or getting strains and sprains with them.
Okay, and that's a really important word, and that pliability of ligaments and tendons that Miss said. Again, when you're doing an exam, you want to get the correct subject-specific language in there. So instead of just saying increased flexibility, pliability is a good word. You also want to make sure that the flexibility or again, the pliability of your joints and your muscles is completed before you start. So when you come and do a warm-up in school, sometimes we'll do some stretches, which lengthens the muscles, but we'll also do some what's called mobility exercises. This is things like where you do hip rotations or ankle rotations, or you loosen your neck off by rolling it side to side, or you do arm rotations at the shoulder. This is to loosen joints, and again, so not just muscles and ligaments and tendons, but also joints to therefore reduce the chance of injury.
And the next one is increasing your blood flow to the muscles. You know that muscles need oxygen to create energy, and therefore when you're exercising, it's important to get more oxygen in to those muscles. So you've got to get your heart rate up to get that blood flowing around your body to get those oxygen to the working muscles.
Okay, you might know that's blood pressure at times. So if you've got your blood pressure actually rise, so therefore the blood's travelling faster, delivering the oxygen. You want to increase the speed of muscle contraction. So obviously if your muscles aren't warmed up, you won't react as fast. So if your muscle temperature is higher and the oxygen flow to the muscles is higher, you will increase the speed of your muscle contraction, which means you could react faster. So you will often see in a game, you'll see a player who maybe in the first 5 minutes, I'm probably like this myself actually, is quite slow because they're actually still getting moving, they haven't warmed up properly. And that's because they're not able to react as fast because the muscles aren't contracting as fast. You'll often see this with a sub who comes on in a football match, particularly if maybe you might, or a rugby game, if you've got a player who's got injured and all of a sudden you haven't had much chance up and you have to come on, it might take you 5-6 minutes to get into the speed of the game because your muscles aren't contracting fast enough. So the warm-up will increase the muscle contraction and therefore your reaction time.
Yeah, as well as the speed, it also increases the strength of the muscle contraction to provide that power within different sporting events.
Yeah, again, imagine I don't know, a rugby game maybe, and making your first couple of tackles if you've just come off the bench. In rugby, probably aren't as strong as your next ones after that when you're loose and warmed up will be, because actually the strength of your muscle contraction will be able to tackle harder a few minutes later. So you've probably seen that in action. Another one is a release of adrenaline. Adrenaline is the chemical that is released when you are nervous or excited or whatever it may be, and it sort of gets you going. Adrenaline gets you pumped up and ready to play. So one of the reasons a warm-up, you do a good warm-up, you get a little bit of adrenaline in your system first, so you're ready to go and you are sort of pumped up and ready to play straight away.
And we know part of the warm-up also includes skill rehearsal, which is when you are rehearsing the skills that you are going to perform in the game.
Yeah.
And this will improve your performance, your technique at that sport. So you're rehearsing skills that you may use.
Again, you'll see that in games, all games. So you won't watch a tennis player, they'll come out and they'll hit serves and volleys and forehands and backhands. You'll see a footballer, they'll do some running, but then they'll get a ball out. Rugby player the same. You'll see a gymnast practicing maybe specific moves they're going to do as part of a sequence. However, you must do specific skills relevant to your game. Another reason you do a warm-up is you want to delay fatigue. So the more oxygen you get to the muscles, the less tired they're going to get. So it's that simple. You will delay fatigue. You won't get lactic acid as quickly. You're less likely to cramp and things like that. I think generally, I'll list them again for you as part of this. We've gone through each one, all the benefits of warm-up. Again, you've got those in your notes that you've been given as well. But just to rattle them off again, physical benefits of a warm-up. You warm up the muscles to prepare them for physical activity. You increase body temperature, which again makes the muscles more flexible and reduces the chance of injury. You increase heart rate to help the delivery of oxygen. You increase flexibility of joints, muscles, ligaments and tendons, all that reduce the chance of injury. You increase blood flow to get more oxygen to the muscles. You increase the speed of contraction and therefore your your reaction time. You also increase the strength of contraction. You also reduce adrenaline, getting you ready to get playing quicker. You improve your performance via practicing the skills you're going to play in the game. You delay fatigue by delaying lactic acid. And again, you probably have to list them. You can think of all that we've gone into each one and the reasons why you'd have to do it. Okay, I mentioned at the start of this podcast that as well as the physical side of a warm-up, the psychological side is also vital. And again, people often miss this out. They often forget to talk about the psychological benefits of warm-up. And there are a number of psychological benefits of warm-up. And again, which are very important to get you playing at your maximum ability straight away in a game. The first one is about heightening arousal. So arousal is how ready you are to play. And we talked in the physical benefits about things like adrenaline, and we talked about things like oxygen. The more heightened your arousal level is, the sharper you will be at the start of the game, the more able to react quickly you are able to be, and the more in the zone you will be. All this means, heightening control and arousal, is basically means that you've got a bit more adrenaline in your system, you are alert and you are ready to play. And if you think of somebody like maybe a sprinter who's got to do a sprint start, which is really important, your reaction time, if your arousal level is correct, you'll go quicker on the gun. Now, again, you've got to be careful here. You've probably seen some players get too hyped up, so your arousal goes too far, which means you actually end up going ahead of the gun. Or I've seen it in football where maybe the first tackle in a game, someone's over aroused, so they go in for a crazy tackle. You've got to get it right. You need to get your arousal levels correct so you are focused in the game, adrenaline flowing and ready to start fast.
Yeah, as well as the focus, you want to improve your concentration on the game. Going into a warm-up, getting the feel for the pitch or the pool.
Your surroundings, your environment.
Yeah, wherever you are, you're in the zone, as Sir said, and then you are concentrating on what you have got to do, what the focus is going forwards.
That could be carrying out a manager's instructions, it could be marking a particular player, it could be focusing on a particular skill in your performance that you know you find difficult, whatever that may be. So improving concentration is vital. Your third one is increasing motivation. Now, again, this would be different depending on different sports. In team sports, other people might try and motivate you, so things they might say to you, try and gee you up, etc. But your warm-up can be used to mentally motivate yourself. So let me give you an example. You might have played a tennis match, and you're playing a player who has beat you before, but you know it was close, and you've really got to make sure you're on your game and you're motivated to beat that player. You could use that warm-up to think about the previous game, to think about what went well, to think about how you're going to beat this player the next time, and to motivate yourself to play at your maximum. And it increases your drive and increases your motivation.
We discussed, sorry sir,
no, you carry on,
we
miss.
discussed earlier skill rehearsal, so rehearsing that skill ready for an event, but you also need mental rehearsal, which is psychological benefit.
Yeah.
This is going over in your head. For example, if you were a gymnast and you had a floor routine, you want to go over in your head what moves you were going to be performing, what skills you were going to be performing. Yeah, the order of them and how the technique is going to play out. So it's really important to go over that in your head before during a warm-up.
Okay, that's called mental rehearsal. I mean, another great example of that is you'll see Formula One drivers, and they'll sit in they'll sit in a chair or they'll sit in the car before they're actually moving, and they'll almost envisage themselves driving around the track. They'll imagine the corners, they'll imagine what they're going to do at each point, imagine overtaking someone. They'll rehearse what they want to happen to make themselves perform well. It's called mental rehearsal. They rehearse the performance they're about to do, so hopefully they can do it and sort of follow through on their goals. The final one would be an increasing confidence. So, I don't know if you've ever done this, where you've done a warm-up and you've been awful in your warm-up. Now you can have the other effect if you're not careful. So you want to be at your most confident when you start the game, and your warm-up can help you to do that. Want to be ready to physically play, and also if your skill rehearsal's gone well, just feeling confident, feeling your touch is right, feeling comfortable in your surroundings, so your confidence increases and you play at your maximum ability. Although I would say there are times when if your warm-up goes badly, and you haven't prepared properly, your confidence can certainly drop and you'll start to feel not right. So increasing your confidence is vital. So your psychological benefits of warm-up, there's 5. You've got control arousal level, so heighten your arousal so you're ready to get in the zone and play. Improve your concentration, number 2. Increase your motivation, number 3. Mental rehearsal, so you've practiced or you've envisaged the skills you're going to do, as number 4. And increase your confidence as number 5. They are 5 psychological benefits of a warm-up. Okay, so we've looked so far in this podcast of LO2 of what a warm-up is, what are the physical benefits, and what are the psychological benefits of warm-up. We've gone through them in quite a lot of detail. Obviously, if you can list them, that'll be your basic marks. If you can say what they are, you can list them. But obviously, if you can explain them and go into that level of detail, that's when you're going to pick up more marks, particularly on the 2, 3, 4, 5 mark questions. We're now going to look quite quickly, this shouldn't take us too long, on the components of a warm-up. So what should actually be in a warm-up that you do before you play a sport? And there are 5 components that you need to know. Now, again, we're pretty sure you can list those 5. You can just say what the 5 is. That's your basic level of marks. If you can explain them and say why and give examples, that would be a higher level of marks. So, your warm-up, and again, some people have slightly different orders, but you ideally need to get the order as we tell you it now. The first part would be a pulse raiser. We mentioned this in physical benefits before. A pulse raiser is where you slowly increase your heart rate and body temperature. So you do some running, you do some jogging, you actually see rugby players now sat on the side of a pitch on an exercise bike before they go on a pitch. Yeah, whatever those pulse raiser things to get your heart rate moving and get your body temperature up. You do this obviously because you're trying to get oxygen to the working muscles. So yeah, you'll see all those things: cycling, skipping, hopping, so do some sprint work, whatever else. And if you look at any warm-up of any professional team or any individual professional athlete, you'll see them do a pulse raiser. That is stage 1. Miss?
Stage 2 is mobility. So that's exercises that take joints through their full range of movement. So for example, arm swings, hip circles, you might do your opening and closing of the gates, opening your hips up, just getting those joints really warmed up. Sometimes you neglect the joints and concentrate just on the muscles, but if you remember, one of our physical benefits was increasing the flexibility of joints, so the mobility really works on that. Yeah,
and again, if you're doing a proper warm, you're not often misses right. People do miss that out. They'll just do stretching straight after a pulse raiser. Well, actually, you need to make sure your joints are loose as well. And actually, it's really important for avoiding injury as well. So Right, so we've got pulse raiser first, followed by mobility, and then you do some dynamic movement. So dynamic means fast, basically. So you'll do some agility stuff, some quick changes of direction, some sprints. So you might see, again, I've seen loads of football and rugby teams where they're in a circle and then they'll run in towards the middle and the coach will blow a whistle and they all sprint back out to the outside. You might do some cone work or some jumps and then runs. It's fast, dynamic, aggressive movements to get your body, 1, warm, 2, loose, and 3, there's loads of psychological benefit to these dynamic movements, getting you ready for the game. So we've got pulse raiser, mobility, and dynamic movements as your first 3. Number 4, miss?
Number 4 is stretching. Now that's both dynamic and static stretching. So dynamic stretching is stretching whilst movement, which again increases the flexibility, increases the range of motion that you can put upon your muscles. Your static stretching is when you're stretching
Still.
each individual muscles, still. So it might be, for example, just stretching your hamstrings. You normally hold it for about 8 to 10 seconds.
Yeah, these are the ones you've done loads of these
You
at
know
school,
them.
You've done loads of static stretch. You get a position, you hold it for 8 seconds, and you do the other side. Dynamic ones will be on the move, as Miss said.
It might be lunges or...
I've seen them do squats and things like that, or kicking out a leg even could be stretching that way. The final ones, we've got pulse raiser, mobility, dynamic movement, stretching, and the final one is skill rehearsal. I mentioned before about the importance of skill rehearsal. So this is where you do some things from the game that you're playing. So if you're a footballer, you get a ball out, you do some passing, some dribbling, whatever. If you're a hockey player, you might do some dribbling, you might do some passing, you might do some stopping with a stick. If you're a netballer, some passing, some dodging, all the things that are relevant to you. Now, obviously, it could also be relevant to your game, but also to your position. Obviously, a goalkeeper would do different skill rehearsal in football than a centre midfielder would. So the keeper you'll see go to the side and do some shots and some crosses, all the rest of it. Where the outfield players will be doing stuff with the ball. Whatever sport you play, you will be practicing some of the skills from that game. You're rehearsing skills specifically from that game. And again, there's psychological and physical benefits of that. So make sure, again, it might ask you about a particular sport. Every sport does it. An ice skater would do some skating and do some moves that are going to be in a routine. A gymnast would do some things that are going to be in their routine or performance. So you take skills from the game and you practice them. So 5 parts of a warm-up. 1, pulse raiser. 2, mobility. 3, dynamic movements, the fast ones. 4, stretching, remember the static and dynamic stretching, and 5 is skill rehearsal from whatever sport or activity that you are doing. Okay, so we've now covered all the stuff on warm-up. So we did what a warm-up is, we did physical benefits, we did psychological benefits, and we did the 5 parts of warm-up. We now need to look at cool-down. In a very similar fashion, we've got to look at why we do a cool-down. Now again, as with all these things, you'll be able to list some things to pick up some marks, but if you want to get the higher marks, you need to be able to explain why you do these things. The why is key. So we're going to look at why you do a cool-down. We'll look at physical benefits of a cool-down. What is the point of doing one? Why do we bother? And actually, a lot of researchers and scientists, sports scientists, say that cool-down is actually more beneficial than a warm-up. If you're only going to do one, you should do a cool-down. I'd probably disagree and say they're both equally important, to be honest, but we're going to look at the reasons why you would do a cool-down. The first reason you do a cool-down is what's called transition. So making sure that your body transitions back into its resting state. You shouldn't just stop straight away because your body doesn't have a chance to transition back into the resting state. You want to gradually bring your temperature down, your heart rate down, pay back lactic acid, all these things, and gradually transition your body safely, sensibly, and the best way of making your body not have any after effects, slowly into a resting state. And that's why you do a cool down, to gradually transition your body back into a resting state. And then part of that would be, Miss?
Yeah, so to gradually also lower your heart rate. Your heart rate has obviously been raised during exercise. For it to go straight back to your resting state would be really dangerous, so you have to do gentle exercises to ensure that is going down slowly back to its resting rate.
Yeah, and it's very similar with body temperature. You want to gradually lower your body temperature so your body temperature slowly comes down. Again, helping you avoid injuries or anything else like that, but you want to gradually bring your body temperature back to normal. And again, you've probably all played sports where it's really hot and you're playing really hard, and all of a sudden you stop and you get that horrible headache after you finish, and you feel all your muscles overheating, and you'll start to dehydrate. You get horrible blood pooling. Gradually bringing your temperature down is a much better idea than just stopping. Miss.
It also circulates the blood and oxygen back around the body. So when you're exercising, oxygen mainly goes to work at those muscles again to provide the energy. You need to get that blood and oxygen back around to, for example, the digestive system and back around the body as it would be at a resting state.
It also helps you pay back your oxygen debt. So if you've been working at a high intensity, you want to keep the oxygen going to those muscles to pay back any oxygen debt so you don't get sore afterwards, basically. So circulating that blood and oxygen is key. Reduces breathing rate, exactly the same as heart rate. We gradually reduce our breathing rate because that keeps oxygen going round to our working muscles and the other parts of our body that we may have worked hard.
Yeah, you want to remove your lactic acid that has built up during exercise. So any waste products be removed.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you work at a high intensity and you go anaerobic, you'll get lactic acid.
That wobbly feeling.
Yeah, that horrible feeling and sometimes the day after you wake up and you get out of bed and your muscles are sore. That's lactic acid. So you want to remove as much as that as you can during your cool down by breathing and by sending the blood around there, delivering oxygen.
Stretching.
Yeah, stretch it off, get rid of as much as you can so you're not stiff the next day. Which leads us on to a cool down helps remove muscle stiffness and soreness, and that's because of removal of lactic acid. It's the same thing, really.
And then finally we have aid in recovery by stretching the muscles. So you do have to stretch after you've done exercise to both lengthen and strengthen the muscles ready for the next time that you work out, particularly if you are, say, a professional athlete who are training at least 3, 4, 5 times a week and then competing as well. It's really important that you're stretching off your muscles, still removing the lactic acid and just ensuring that they're not going to be injured in the future or overused.
Yeah, it's really important that, because it means you couldn't train next time or you couldn't play in the next game, and obviously you need to be able to do that if you're playing at a good level particularly. So we've got, just to list them again for you, physical benefits for cool down. It helps your body transition back to resting. It will gradually lowers your heart rate, gradually lowers your body temperature, helps you circulate blood and oxygen to keep the oxygen to the muscles. It reduces your breathing rate, it removes waste products, and that helps remove stiffness and soreness, and it aids your recovery, which means you can train again more quickly. There are actually only 2 parts you need to know for a cool down. So just like in the warm-up, we had 5 components. Our 5 components of warm-up, just to recap, were pulse raiser, mobility, dynamic movement, stretching, and skill rehearsal. For a cool down, you only need to know 2. Number 1 is pulse lowering, which we've already explained the reasons for, to gradually lower the heart rate, reduce the muscle temperature, and pay back oxygen debt. And to do that, you do things like light jogging and walking, and you're just gradually slowing your body down with some exercise. And the other part of a cool down is stretching. So you'll do a pulse lower and then you'll do some stretching. And again, this reduces muscle stiffness, soreness, again helps move lactic acid. And you already know about static stretches. Miss talked about them before. You do loads of static stretches afterwards. If you've ever been lucky enough to go to Premier League game or Super League game, if you stay long enough, if you're allowed to after the game, if you stay about 20 minutes, the teams come back out often. So you'll often, and I've seen it a few times when I've watched games, you'll see a team come back out and the whole team comes by, everyone who's played, and they'll start running around the edge of the pitch, and they gradually get slower and slower and slower. They're reducing their pulse, they're gradually paying back the oxygen debt and lowering their pulse and lowering their muscle temperature. And then when they've done 3-4 times around the pitch, getting slower, then they do some stretching just to remove stiffness and help recovery. So the 2 components of a cool down are pulse lowering gradually, and then you would do some stretching. Okay, so we've dealt with what a warm-up's for, physical and mental, psychological effects, what parts of a warm-up there are. We've done the physical benefits of a cool down and what parts are of a cool down. And the next bit is, how do you plan a warm-up and a cool down? So basically, if I was going to take a session, I was going to take a team or an individual, anyone, I was going to plan a warm-up or a cool down for them, what things do I need to take into consideration? What things would help me? What information would help me plan a warm-up or a cool down? So
this links to LO1, where we talk about the intrinsic factors. So this is all on your PIPs, your individual variables. That is what we are looking at now, and we need to know these individual variables for a warm-up or cool down. So the next 7 that we go through are all linked to individual variables of your intrinsic factors.
Yeah, because you know that I would warm up a group of students your age differently than I would warm up a group of adults, for instance, because
80-year-old pensions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd have to consider their individual needs. So we'll go through the factors you need to think about. So first of all, the first thing I would think about is any medical conditions that the individual or group might have. Do I need to be aware of anything, any medical issues, any past injuries, or maybe it could be even an illness they had like asthma or diabetes, anything I'd need to know that I'd have to consider as part of a warm-up, because I might have to change my warm-up appropriately, and I'd certainly have to make sure they're taking medication or anything like that. So number one is being aware of any medical conditions that anyone in the group or an individual may have.
The second one is knowing the size of your group. So you need to know how many participants will be in your group to consider how much equipment you might need, whether they go in smaller groups, and what you do with that class, looking at your space. So number 2 is the size of the group.
Yeah, and even within that, you might even have your subs do a slightly different warm-up in a football or rugby match than your players who are starting. So you'd have to know the total size and then who's in which group or whatever, as Miss said. Third one would be disability. Do any of the participants need any of the activities adapting or any specialist equipment? So I'd have to consider, and there are sports where it could be a total disability sport, or it could be a mixture of able-bodied and disabled players. And do I have to adapt anything in my warm-up for anybody who's in that group? So disability would be my third one.
So we've had medical conditions, size of the group, and disability. The fourth one, as Sarah touched on before, is the age of participants. So are the participants young or old? The activities that you're planning for the warm-up must suit the needs and the interests of the individual. So you're say older people who are perhaps slightly less fit than younger people.
They could be fitter though.
They could be fitter, correct. They would do something different. So you just need to be aware of that.
I once did a warm up with one of my school football teams, and for some reason my dad had come to watch and wanted to take part. This is true. And had a go at the warm up I did with 15-year-olds and instantly injured himself because he pulled a hamstring straight away. So my dad as a 70-plus-year-old, it wasn't a particularly good idea. What he was doing, I've no idea anyway. So we've got medical conditions, size of group, disability, age of participants. The next thing you need to consider, and this is vital, is the fitness level. So again, are they trained? Are they unfit? Have I got different people with different fitness levels in the group? Any previous injuries? Are they flexible? I'm not going to start doing all kinds of things that they would not do or might injure them. Size and weight maybe could. So individual fitness levels would be completely different. And again, depending on the group you've got, you should know your individuals. Are they able to take part in the fitness activities as part of one that you are giving them?
The next one is the experience of the participants. So are they beginners? Are they experts? Are they professionals? Or are they intermediate level? With that, you would have to vary the skill that you are giving them and tailor the warm-up to suit their experience.
Yeah, I think, again, you could probably tell professional footballers just go and do it, and they'll go and do that particular skill, whereas another set of players may not be able to do that skill if there wasn't experience. So you just need to consider, are they able to actually do what you're asking them to?
Make sure it's challenging but also achievable for all.
And the last one would be the gender. Now, when we say gender, we're not talking about gender stereotypes here. We're talking about different genders have different things that not all, because people are all different, but different things they're better. So women tend to be more flexible, for instance. Men tend to be stronger, so you have to consider what you are doing and consider the gender. I will say again, I'm sure there were lots of women who are stronger than lots of men, and men who are more flexible, but in general, you have to consider the gender and the activities that would suit. Or do you even have a mixed gender group, or is it an individual gender? You'd have to consider that as well. So 7 components you need to think about when planning your warm-up: medical conditions, size of the group, disability, age, individual fitness levels, experience of participants, and gender of the participants. You'd have to consider all those when planning a warm-up or a cool-down. Okay, so we've now covered what a warm-up is, what a cool-down is, the physical and psychological benefits of a warm-up, the physical benefits of a cool-down, and what parts there should be of a warm-up and a cool-down. The final thing we need to look at as part of LO2 is to look at what environmental factors would affect what you do in a warm-up or what warm-up you do. So, if we start with a warm-up, there are two things you would consider as regards environmental factors. So environmental factors are things in the facilities, in the environment around you, the weather conditions, etc., that might affect what you do. So in a warm-up, you'd have to consider, and it's fairly simple, the playing surface or the surface that you're doing the activity on. So would that surface cause injury by doing too much on it? Would it maybe be too hard from hot or too soft from really wet weather? You'd have to consider the playing surface. Do you want to go on that playing surface as part of your warm-up, or do you want to warm up elsewhere? You don't want to cause more injuries, or you don't want to make the conditions worse for when you actually play on it. So it's really important you consider the playing surface as part of your warm-up. The second thing you consider would be the temperature. If it's ridiculously hot, you might want to do your warm. You might want to consider where and how you do your warm. You don't want them to lead to heat stroke or sunburn. You don't want to get the players overheated or dehydrated before they've even started playing. You might ask the players to wear sun cream. You might ask the players to warm up in a shaded area. If there was an indoor area, you might consider that if the conditions are really hot, because you wouldn't want to subject them to hot conditions for extra amounts of time. So environmental factors on a warm-up, you would consider the playing surface, and you would consider the temperature, particularly if it was too hot. On a cool down, you would also have environmental factors to consider. So the first thing is you would consider the facilities. So what space do you have, what conditions you have. Again, could you go inside if the pitch was in a bad state, or everyone was cold afterwards, or that it was really difficult conditions? You might want to go inside if you had that available to you. You might want to go in the shade. You might want to come off the pitch and do it in a bit at the side of the pitch where the surface was better. You'd have to consider the facilities and the pitch that you had available. The other thing you might want to consider, again, if we go back to conditions, is it too hot? So hot conditions would be the second one on a cool down. Would you want to move to a shaded area? Would you want to go indoors? Do you need to take on extra fluids before you cool down to avoid dehydration? Obviously, in professional sports, you might see they have an ice bath afterwards to try and lower their temperature. You have to consider what the conditions are, obviously what facilities you have available, and if it's too hot, you want to get your players cool down to do your warm-up as quickly as possible. So you can gradually bring down that temperature and not stay in really hot temperatures. Again, if it's cold is the third one, and that would be the opposite. Do you need to do a cool down inside because the players are too cold, or your performers too cold? If you've got really bad conditions, it's really cold or icy or wet, the pitch was really bad after the competition or performance, you might want to go inside to avoid any slipping in the cool down that might prevent injuries. You might get sprains or strains, things like that. If it's really cold, you might need to do a longer cool down to make sure you avoid any injuries. So again, you might take them inside and do a much longer cool down. And again, if it's cold, you might want to do lots more stretching to make sure that nothing's tight because it's been cold during a performance. Again, with it cool down, you'd have to consider whether the facilities you've got available and the pitch, is it too hot? So hot conditions in the environment or cold conditions in the environment. So again, we've now covered what are the conditions and the environmental factors you'd need to look at before doing your cool down and warm up. For warm up, you have to consider the temperature and is it too hot, and you also have to consider the playing surface. And in a cool down, you consider the facilities you've got available. You consider again whether it's too hot and whether it is too cold. So again, if you could just list them, that's your basic level of answer, but if you can explain why, that would be a more in-depth answer. Again, we're just looking at an exam question I've got in front of me now, and it was just explain about a footballer is learning about warm-up and cooling down as part of his programme. Explain 3 ways in which environmental factors could affect a cool down. So again, you would name the 3 environmental factors of facilities, temperature being hot conditions, or temperature being cold conditions. And again, it does ask that question, asks you to explain. You'd have to say why, not just enough to say facilities, hot conditions, cold conditions. You'd have to say why they would be important, why you may have to alter your cool down as a consequence of that. So that will complete our podcast on Learning Objective 2. Lots of information there, and obviously you've got information in your books, lots of information online. Make sure you've spoke to your teachers about the specifics of the revision they want you to do. But again, another way of revising for you, and we'll be doing podcasts for LO3 and LO4, and there's also one on here for LO1. See you next time.